Hey everyone! Today we're diving into how a short Scottish immigrant became America's richest man by inventing a business strategy so powerful that Jeff Bezos still uses it to crush competitors today. Picture this. You're standing in Pittsburgh, 1875. The air is thick with coal smoke and the deafening roar of blast furnaces. While other steel barons are scrambling to buy the cheapest iron ore they can find, Carnegie is doing something that seems absolutely insane. He's spending millions to buy iron. Mines, coal mines, railroads, and even the ships that transport raw materials. His competitors are laughing, calling him reckless. They have no idea they're watching the birth of vertical integration, the same strategy that would later make Amazon worth over $1 trillion. Here's what's absolutely mind-blowing. Carnegie wasn't just making steel, he was building the world's first truly integrated supply chain. While his competitors were at the mercy of suppliers who could jack up prices overnight, Carnegie controlled every single step from digging iron ore out of the ground to delivering finished steel beams to construction sites. It's exactly what Tesla does today when they build their own batteries instead of buying them. Or what Netflix did when they stopped licensing content and started producing their own shows. But here's the kicker that nobody talks about. Carnegie's vertical integration wasn't just about controlling costs. It was about controlling information. When you own every step of the process, you know exactly how much everything should cost, how long everything should take, and where every bottleneck exists. His competitors were flying blind, making decisions based on guesswork. Carnegie was operating with perfect information. If this kind of business detective work fascinates you, smash that like button and subscribe for more shocking business stories. Drop a comment with what modern company reminds you most of this story. The man who would become America's steel king started as a bobbin boy in a textile factory, making $1.20 a week. But by the time he was 30, he had already grasped something that would take the business world another century to fully understand. In industrial warfare, whoever controls the supply chain controls everything. His competitors thought they were in the steel business. Carnegie realized he was in the control business. Now, let me take you back to witness how this incredible story unfolded. Starting with the moment Carnegie realized that being the best steel producer in America meant absolutely nothing if someone else controlled what went into making that steel. You're walking through Carnegie's Edgar Thomson Steel Works in 1875, and something feels different from every other steel mill in America. While competitors are constantly worried about their suppliers, will the iron ore shipment arrive on time? Will coal prices spike next month? Carnegie's operation runs with clockwork precision that seems almost supernatural. Here is the holy shit moment that changed everything. Carnegie discovered that his biggest competitive advantage wasn't making steel faster or cheaper. It was never having to negotiate with anyone else ever again. While competitors spent weeks haggling with iron ore suppliers, Carnegie's teams were already extracting ore from his own mines in Minnesota. While others prayed that railroad companies wouldn't raise shipping rates, Carnegie's own railroad cars were already delivering materials at cost. The tactical breakdown is brilliant in its simplicity. Carnegie calculated that every middleman in the steel supply chain was adding 15 to 20% markup. Iron ore suppliers, coal dealers, transportation companies, equipment manufacturers, each one taking their cut. By eliminating 5 middlemen, Carnegie could produce steel at 70% of his competitors' costs while maintaining the same profit margins. It's exactly what Amazon does today when they cut out retail middlemen and sell directly to consumers, or when Apple designs their own chips instead of buying from Intel. But here is the psychological insight that most people miss. Carnegie wasn't just building a business, he was building a fortress. Every mine he bought, every railroad he acquired, Every shipping company he controlled was another wall protecting him from the chaos that destroyed other steel barons. His competitors were warriors fighting in the open field. Carnegie was a general commanding from an impregnable castle. What's absolutely fascinating is how this strategy revealed information asymmetries that his competitors couldn't even see. When Carnegie owned the iron mines, he knew exactly what ore cost to extract. When competitors bid on projects, they had to guess. Carnegie could underbid them by 30% and still make massive profits because he knew his real costs while they were estimating theirs. Meanwhile, his biggest competitor, the Cambria Iron Company, was hemorrhaging money because their coal supplier had raised prices by 40% overnight. They had no choice but to pay. They needed that coal to keep their furnaces running. Carnegie's response? He bought 3 more coal mines that week. The ripple effects were devastating for traditional steel companies. They found themselves trapped in what we now call the middleman's dilemma, dependent on suppliers who were increasingly controlled by their biggest competitor. It's the same trap that traditional retailers fell into when Amazon started controlling logistics, or that car companies face now that Tesla controls battery production. Carnegie was essentially creating the world's first business moat, not just a competitive advantage, but a self-reinforcing system where every expansion made competition more impossible. You're sitting in Carnegie's Pittsburgh office in 1885, when a telegram arrives that would make most steel barons panic. The Pennsylvania Railroad, Carnegie's biggest customer and the largest railroad in America, has just announced they're building their own steel mills. They're tired of paying Carnegie's prices and want to cut out the middleman. Carnegie's assistant expects him to be furious. Instead, Carnegie starts laughing. Here's the holy shit moment. While the Pennsylvania Railroad thought they were playing chess, Carnegie was playing 4D business warfare. The railroad executives had made a classic strategic blunder. They assumed that owning steel production would give them the same advantages Carnegie had. What they didn't realize was that Carnegie's power didn't come from making steel. It came from controlling every input that made steel possible. The tactical breakdown is absolutely ruthless. Within 6 months, Carnegie had bought controlling interests in 3 major coal suppliers that the Pennsylvania Railroad would need for their new steel operation. He acquired iron ore deposits they'd already surveyed. He even purchased shipping companies that transported raw materials along their planned supply routes. By the time the Pennsylvania Railroad opened their steel mills, Carnegie controlled 80% of everything they needed to operate. It's exactly what Google does today when competitors try to build search engines. Google doesn't just compete on search quality, they control the entire ecosystem of data collection, advertising networks, and distribution channels. Or how Amazon responds when retailers try to compete. They don't just offer better prices. They control the logistics networks, payment processing, and even the cloud infrastructure their competitors depend on. But here's the psychological insight that's pure genius. Carnegie understood that his customers' biggest fear wasn't paying high prices. It was being dependent on someone else for their survival. So instead of lowering his prices to keep the Pennsylvania Railroad happy, he made their independence attempt so expensive and risky that they'd beg to become dependent on him again. What's absolutely fascinating is how Carnegie turned the railroad's own infrastructure against them. He negotiated exclusive shipping deals with competing railroads, creating a logistics nightmare for Pennsylvania Railroad's steel operation. Their own trains couldn't efficiently transport materials to their steel mills because Carnegie had locked up the most efficient routes and loading facilities. Meanwhile, smaller steel companies watched this corporate warfare with growing terror. If Carnegie could neutralize the largest railroad in America, what chance did they have? Several steel producers began approaching Carnegie about buyout deals before he even made offers. The information asymmetry here was staggering. The Pennsylvania Railroad's executives thought they understood steel production costs because they bought so much steel. But they had no idea about the hidden costs of coordinating suppliers, managing inventory, or optimizing production schedules. Carnegie had spent 15 years learning those lessons while they were focused on running trains. This is where Carnegie's vertical integration strategy evolved from defensive protection into offensive domination, the blueprint that modern platform companies like Amazon use to not just compete with suppliers, but to make competing with them economically impossible. You're in the opulent boardroom of J.P. Morgan's New York mansion in December 1899, where America's most powerful financier is orchestrating what he believes will be the final chess move against Andrew Carnegie. Morgan has assembled a coalition of steel companies, railroad barons, and Wall Street titans with one goal: break Carnegie's stranglehold on American steel production. The stakes couldn't be higher. Whoever wins this battle will control the backbone of America's industrial future. Here's the holy shit moment that nobody saw coming. While Morgan was busy creating the Federal Steel Company by merging Carnegie's competitors, Carnegie was quietly implementing what we now recognize as the platform strategy that would later make companies like Amazon and Google unstoppable. Instead of just defending his territory, Carnegie started offering his integrated supply chain as a service to smaller manufacturers, essentially turning his competitors' customers into his own distribution network. The tactical breakdown is breathtakingly sophisticated. Carnegie realized that Morgan's consolidation strategy had a fatal flaw. All those merged companies still needed raw materials, transportation, and specialized equipment that Carnegie controlled. So Carnegie made them an offer they couldn't refuse. He'd supply everything they needed at prices 20% below market rate. But with one condition: they had to sign exclusive 5-year contracts and agree to buy increasing volumes each year. It's exactly what Amazon Web Services does today when they offer cloud infrastructure to companies that compete with Amazon's retail business, or how Google provides Android to phone manufacturers while collecting their data. But here's the psychological warfare that's pure genius. Carnegie knew that Morgan's ego wouldn't let him accept being dependent on his biggest rival. So Carnegie deliberately made the deals so attractive that Morgan's newly merged companies couldn't survive without them, while simultaneously ensuring that accepting the deals would publicly demonstrate Morgan's strategic failure. What's absolutely fascinating is how Carnegie weaponized information asymmetry against Wall Street's smartest minds. Morgan's team had access to financial statements and market data, but Carnegie had operational intelligence. He knew exactly how much it cost to extract iron ore, how long it took to ship materials, and what production bottlenecks would emerge when demand increased. When Morgan's companies projected their costs for 1900, they were using industry averages. Carnegie was using perfect information about his own integrated operations. Meanwhile, smaller steel producers were making desperate moves that revealed just how completely Carnegie had reshaped the competitive landscape. The Republic Steel Company tried to build their own supply chain, but discovered that Carnegie already controlled the most efficient iron ore deposits, coal mines, and transportation routes. They ended up paying 40% more for inferior raw materials, making their steel completely uncompetitive. The ripple effects were staggering. Morgan realized that his financial engineering couldn't overcome Carnegie's operational dominance. Even with unlimited capital, you can't create vertical integration overnight. Carnegie had spent 25 years building relationships, optimizing processes, and securing the best resources. It's the same advantage that Amazon has today in logistics or that Tesla has in battery technology. This moment marked the evolution from traditional business competition to what we now call ecosystem warfare, where victory goes not to who makes the best product, but to who controls the most comprehensive platform. You're witnessing the most expensive business conversation in American history as Carnegie sits across from J.P. Morgan in early 1901. The tension is electric. Morgan, who once declared that he could buy anything, has just realized he's met the one man who can't be financially intimidated. Carnegie has turned the tables so completely that Morgan, despite controlling more capital than most governments, is essentially begging to buy Carnegie steel. Here's the peak moment that changed capitalism forever. Carnegie quotes his price, $480 million, equivalent to over $15 billion today, making him instantly the richest man in America. But the real power move isn't the astronomical price. It's Carnegie's condition that reveals the true genius of vertical integration. He demands that U.S. Steel, Morgan's new mega corporation, must honor all of Carnegie's existing supply contracts and operational agreements. Carnegie isn't just selling his company, he's forcing his replacement to operate within the integrated ecosystem he created. The immediate aftermath sent shockwaves through American industry. Within months of the sale, Carnegie's integrated supply chain model became the template for every major industrial operation. Railroad companies started buying coal mines. Oil companies began acquiring refineries and gas stations. Manufacturing giants started controlling their raw material sources. Carnegie hadn't just built a steel empire, he had accidentally invented the modern corporation. But here's what's absolutely mind-blowing about the consequences. Morgan thought he was buying Carnegie's steel mills and blast furnaces. What he actually bought was the world's first fully integrated industrial platform. The physical assets were worth maybe $200 million. The other $280 million was for the relationships, contracts, logistics networks, and operational knowledge that made vertical integration possible. It's exactly like when Facebook bought Instagram. They weren't just buying a photo app. They were buying a platform that could be integrated into their ecosystem. The ripple effects were immediate and devastating for traditional business models. Companies that had thrived as middlemen suddenly found themselves squeezed out by vertically integrated giants. Independent iron ore dealers, coal brokers, and transportation companies watched their profit margins evaporate as more industries adopted Carnegie's model. What's fascinating is how this moment revealed the fundamental shift from an economy based on trading to an economy based on controlling. Before Carnegie, business success meant being the best at buying low and selling high. After Carnegie, success meant eliminating the need to buy and sell from others entirely. The psychological impact on American business leaders was profound. Suddenly, every CEO was asking the same question: what parts of our supply chain should we own instead of rent? This thinking would eventually lead to everything from Henry Ford's vertically integrated automobile production to Amazon's decision to build their own logistics network instead of relying on UPS and FedEx. Carnegie's sale to Morgan marked the end of one era and the beginning of another, the transition from fragmented markets to integrated platforms that would define business strategy for the next century. You're looking at the business world Carnegie created, and it's impossible to ignore how his vertical integration DNA runs through every dominant company today. Carnegie didn't just build a steel empire, he created the architectural blueprint for platform dominance that powers trillion-dollar companies from Amazon to Apple to Tesla. The long-term impact on business practices was revolutionary. Carnegie's model proved that controlling your supply chain wasn't just about cost savings. It was about creating what economists now call network effects and switching costs. Once customers became dependent on your integrated platform, leaving became exponentially expensive. This principle drives everything from Apple's ecosystem lock-in to Amazon's marketplace dominance. When you control multiple layers of the value chain, customers can't easily replace you because they'd have to rebuild relationships with multiple vendors. The regulatory and industry changes that followed Carnegie's success reshaped capitalism itself. The Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890 was essentially a direct response to the monopolistic power that vertical integration could create. But here's the fascinating irony. Instead of stopping vertical integration, antitrust law simply forced companies to become more sophisticated about it. Modern tech giants use the same strategies Carnegie pioneered. They just call it platform economics and ecosystem development instead of vertical integration. What's absolutely brilliant is how Carnegie's pattern recognition translates to today's business warfare. Netflix realized they needed to control content production, not just distribution. Tesla understood that controlling battery technology was more important than making pretty cars. Amazon knew that owning logistics would matter more than having the best website. Each of these companies followed Carnegie's playbook. Identify the most critical bottleneck in your industry, then control it completely. The pattern we see everywhere now is this. In any industry where products become commoditized, whoever controls the most integrated platform wins. Carnegie saw that steel production would become a commodity, so he built an empire around controlling everything that made steel possible. Today's smart entrepreneurs look for industries where the core product is becoming commoditized ride-sharing, cloud storage, streaming media, and ask themselves, has the equivalent of Carnegie's iron mines and railroads in this space? Here's the most powerful lesson for modern business builders. Carnegie's success wasn't about being the best steel producer. It was about making steel production irrelevant by controlling everything around it. Amazon didn't win by being the best online bookstore. They won by building infrastructure that made being just a retailer irrelevant. Apple didn't dominate by making the best individual devices. They created an ecosystem where their individual products became more valuable together than apart. The three game-changing lessons are: first, identify dependencies that your competitors can't easily replicate. Second, turn your supply chain into your competitive moat. Third, when customers try to cut you out, make yourself more essential, not cheaper. Here's how today's entrepreneurs can apply this. Stop thinking about what product you're selling and start thinking about what platform you're building. Ask yourself what critical resources or relationships in your industry are currently controlled by middlemen. Then figure out how to own those bottlenecks directly. Most importantly, remember that vertical integration isn't about owning everything. It's about controlling the pieces that matter most for long-term dominance. Which brings up the fascinating question: in our AI-driven economy, what will be the equivalent of Carnegie's iron mines, the critical resources that tomorrow's business titans will fight to control?